John Miller walked slowly through the quiet streets of Portland as the early morning sun began to peek over the buildings. The November air felt sharp in his lungs. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his thin frame. At 58 years old, John's face told the story of a hard life. Deep lines marked his forehead and the corners of his eyes. His beard was gray and untrimmed, but something in his eyes still held a spark, even after 3 years of living on the streets. Today marked day 2 without food. John's stomach growled loudly as he made his way toward the back of Fresh Value Grocery. He knew their schedule. Tuesday mornings they threw out the bread and produce that was still good but couldn't be sold. John didn't like taking handouts, but he had learned that pride wouldn't fill an empty stomach. The grocery store sat on the corner of Maple and 4th Street. John had slept the night before in the small park 3 blocks away, hidden under a cluster of bushes where police rarely checked. His few belongings fit in a faded green backpack that had once been military issue. The backpack, like John, had seen better days. As he approached the store's back lot, John noticed something different. A new delivery truck sat parked at the loading dock. A man in a crisp white shirt and tie stood watching as workers unloaded boxes. John stopped and observed from the corner of the building. This was new. Usually, no managers were around this early. John debated turning away, but hunger pushed him forward. He moved quietly toward the large metal dumpsters at the far end of the lot. With practiced movements, he looked around to make sure no one watched, then lifted the heavy lid. The familiar smell of garbage hit him, but John had long ago learned to ignore it when searching for food. There, on top, sat several bags of bread and rolls just thrown out. Some fruit, too. John reached in and grabbed 2 bags of bread rolls and an apple that looked perfectly fine. His hands trembled slightly as he stuffed them into his backpack. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice made John freeze. The man in the tie was walking quickly toward him, face tight with anger. "Sir, I'm just taking what you threw away," John said, his voice calm and steady despite his racing heart. "That's store property. We've had enough of you people hanging around here. This is a business, not a soup kitchen." The man pulled out a cell phone. "I'm calling the police." John thought about running, but where would he go? And running would only make things worse. So he stood straight, almost at attention, an old habit from his military days that had never quite left him. "I understand, sir. I'll leave right now," John said. "No, you stay right there. I'm tired of this. The owner told me to clean up this area, and that's what I'm doing." The man, Frank Thompson, had only been manager for 3 weeks. He was determined to prove himself to the store owner. John waited quietly. There was no point arguing. He'd been through this before. Sometimes the police would just tell him to move along. Other times, they'd run his name. That's when problems happened. 10 minutes later, a police car pulled into the lot. Officer Samantha Carter stepped out. She was 32, with brown hair pulled back in a tight bun under her cap. She had been on the force for 7 years and had seen all kinds of situations. "What's the problem here?" she asked, looking between Frank and John. "This man was stealing from our dumpster. He's trespassing on private property," Frank said firmly. Officer Carter looked at John. His clothes were dirty and worn, but he stood with an unusual dignity. She noticed how he kept his eyes level, not looking down like many people did when confronted by police. "Sir, can I see some ID?" she asked. John nodded and reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out a worn wallet. Inside was an old driver's license, expired 2 years ago. He handed it to her. "John Miller," she read aloud. "Mr. Miller, you know you can't be taking things from private property, even if they're throwing it away." "Yes, officer. I understand. I was just hungry." Something in his voice made Officer Carter look at him more closely. There was no self-pity there, just a simple statement of fact. "Wait here a minute," she said, and walked back to her patrol car. John stood still, watching as she typed his name into the computer in her vehicle. He knew what she would find. Last winter, he had been caught sleeping in the doorway of an office building during a freezing night. The owner had pressed charges for trespassing. John had been given a court date, but with no phone, no address, and no way to keep track of dates, he had missed it. Officer Carter frowned at her screen. The system showed an outstanding warrant for John Miller for failure to appear in court on a trespassing charge. Department policy was clear. She had to bring him in. She walked back to where John stood waiting patiently. "Mr. Miller, I'm afraid there's a warrant out for your arrest for missing a court appearance. I'm going to have to take you in." John nodded. He had expected this. "I understand, officer." Frank Thompson smiled slightly, pleased that his problem was being solved. "Sir, please turn around and put your hands behind your back," Officer Carter said. John did as he was told without protest. As she placed the handcuffs on his wrists, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a faded military tattoo on his forearm. It was the emblem of the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the Army's most elite units. "You were a Ranger?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." "Long time ago now," John replied quietly. Something about this didn't feel right to Officer Carter. She had seen homeless people arrested before, but there was something different about John Miller. The way he stood, how he spoke, the respect in his voice. It didn't match the typical cases she handled. As she guided him toward her patrol car, John stumbled slightly. From his pocket fell a small folded piece of paper, laminated in clear plastic. Officer Carter picked it up, thinking it was his ID, but it was an old newspaper clipping, so worn the words were hard to read. She put it with his other belongings, to be logged at the station. "Officer," John said as they reached the car, "would it be possible to keep my backpack with me? It has everything I own." "I'm sorry, sir, it has to be logged with your personal items at the jail. You'll get everything back when you're released." John looked at his backpack with concern. "There's a medal in the inside pocket. It's important to me. Could you make sure it's logged properly?" "I'll make sure everything is handled correctly," she promised, curious about what kind of medal a homeless man would carry. As she helped John into the back seat of her patrol car, he whispered, something that Officer Carter couldn't quite hear. It sounded like, "Never thought I'd end up here after what we did over there." But she wasn't sure, and she had paperwork to complete. The drive to the county jail was quiet. John looked out the window, watching the city pass by. Officer Carter glanced at him in her rearview mirror. Most people she arrested were angry, scared, or belligerent. John just seemed resigned, and somehow that bothered her more. At the jail, John went through the standard booking process. Fingerprints, photograph, personal items logged and stored. Officer Carter made sure his backpack was properly tagged, noting the medal he had mentioned. She watched as John was led away to a holding cell, his back straight despite the circumstances. As she filled out her report later that day, Officer Carter kept thinking about the Ranger's tattoo and the way John carried himself. On impulse, she pulled out the laminated newspaper clipping she had found. Holding it under the bright desk lamp, she tried to make out the faded words. The headline read, "Local soldier receives Silver Star for heroism," but the rest was too faded to read clearly. Officer Carter put the clipping back with John's belongings, but made a note in her report about his military service. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling this wasn't just another routine arrest. There was more to John Miller's story than met the eye. Amy Nelson rushed through the courthouse doors, balancing a cup of coffee in one hand and a stack of files in the other. At 29, she had been working as a public defender for just under 2 years. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and dark circles under her eyes showed the strain of her heavy caseload. She had graduated from law school with dreams of changing the system, of helping people who couldn't afford fancy lawyers. Now those dreams often felt far away under the weight of too many cases and too little time. Amy reached her small office and dropped the files on her desk with a sigh. A yellow sticky note caught her eye. "New case. Homeless vet. Hearing tomorrow. At 9. File on your chair. Greg." Greg Peters was the head of the public defender's office. He assigned cases based on current workload, which meant Amy always had too many. She looked at her chair and saw another manila folder. 23 cases and now 24. She picked up the file and read the name. John Miller. Arrested for trespassing and petty theft after taking food from a dumpster. Failed to appear for a previous court date on a separate trespassing charge. Nothing unusual in the world of public defense. Amy checked her watch. 8:30. She had a hearing. At 9, another at 11, and client meetings all afternoon. She would have to squeeze in time to meet this new client before tomorrow's hearing. She made a note to visit the county jail at 5, after her last scheduled meeting. The day passed in a blur of courtrooms, plea negotiations, and client consultations. Most days were like this, rushing from one case to another, never having enough time to do the kind of legal work she had imagined in law school. At 5:15, Amy signed in at the county jail visitor's desk. "I'm here to see John Miller." "I'm his attorney," she told the guard. The guard nodded and led her to one of the small meeting rooms. These rooms were where attorneys met with clients, stark spaces with metal tables bolted to the floor and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Amy sat down and opened John's file again, quickly reviewing the details before he arrived. The charge was minor, the kind that usually ended with time served or community service. But the missed court date complicated things. The door opened, and a guard led John Miller into the room. Amy looked up and was struck by his appearance. Most of her clients shuffled in, heads down, looking defeated. John walked in with his back straight, his eyes clear. Despite his worn clothes and unkempt beard, he carried himself with dignity. "Mr. Miller, I'm Amy Nelson, your court-appointed attorney," she said, extending her hand across the table. John shook it firmly. "Thank you for coming, ma'am." His politeness surprised her. "Ma'am." Not many people called her that, especially not her. "Clients, please sit down," she said. "We don't have much time before your hearing tomorrow, so I need to get some information from you quickly." John nodded and sat across from her, his posture still straight, hands folded on the table. Amy began her standard questions. Age, address, none. Employment, none. Education, prior arrests. John answered each question directly and clearly. "Any military service?" Amy asked, not looking up from her notes. It was a standard question on her intake form. "Yes, ma'am. United States Army. 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion. 3 tours in Afghanistan." Amy paused her writing and looked up. The Rangers were elite soldiers, special operations, not what she had expected. "How long did you serve?" she asked. 12 years, ma'am. I was a sergeant when I got out." Amy made notes. Military service could sometimes help with the judge, especially with minor offenses like this one. "Do you have any documentation of your service, discharge papers, that sort of thing?" John shook his head. "No, ma'am. Lost everything when I lost my apartment. That was about 3 years ago after my last stay at the VA hospital." "The VA hospital?" Amy's interest grew. "Were you injured during your service?" John's eyes shifted away for the first time. "Not physically, ma'am. The doctors called it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Had some problems after coming home from my last tour. Couldn't sleep, kept seeing things. The VA tried to help, but..." His voice trailed off. Amy looked at John more carefully. His face was weathered, his clothes dirty, but his eyes held a clarity that stood out. This wasn't just another homeless man who had made bad choices. This was someone who had served his country and fallen through the cracks when he came home. "What happened after the VA?" she asked. "They gave me medicine. It helped some, but then there were problems with my benefits. Papers got lost. Appointments got missed. I couldn't keep track of it all." John spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Couldn't pay rent. Ended up on the street. Been there since." Amy felt a twinge of anger. This story was all too common. Veterans who served their country, came home with invisible wounds, and ended up lost in the system. "Mr. Miller, about the current charges. You were arrested for taking food from a dumpster behind a grocery store. And you had a previous trespassing charge where you missed your court date?" "Yes, ma'am. Last winter I was sleeping in a doorway when it was freezing. Owner called the police. They gave me a paper with a court date, but I had no way to keep track of days. No phone, no calendar. I didn't mean to miss it." Amy nodded. It was a story she had heard before. The system wasn't designed for people without homes, without resources. "And the food? From the dumpster?" "Hadn't eaten in 2 days, ma'am. The store throws out good food every Tuesday. I was just taking what they didn't want anymore." Amy made more notes. This was a case that should never have gone this far. A homeless veteran taking discarded food shouldn't be sitting in jail. But the missed court date made things more complicated. The officer who arrested you, Samantha Carter, made a note about a medal. She said you asked her to make sure it was logged properly with your belongings. John's expression changed slightly, a hint of pride mixing with sadness. Silver Star, ma'am. Got it in Afghanistan, second tour. Amy's pen stopped moving. The Silver Star was one of the highest awards for valor in combat. It wasn't given out lightly. You have a Silver Star? She asked, wanting to make sure she had heard correctly. Yes, ma'am. For what action? John hesitated. Rather not talk about it, if that's okay. It was a bad day, lost some good men. Amy respected his privacy, but her mind was racing. A homeless man with a Silver Star for valor, living on the streets of Portland. Something was very wrong with this picture. Mr. Miller, I'd like to request more time to prepare your case properly, and I want to try to locate your military records. I think they could be very helpful in resolving these charges. John looked surprised. You'd do that? Most folks just want to get cases like mine over with. Your service matters, Mr. Miller. And what happened to you after your service matters too. This isn't just about a missed court date or taking food from a dumpster. For the first time, John's composed expression softened slightly. Thank you, ma'am. Not many people see past. He gestured at his worn clothes, his unkempt appearance. Amy closed her file and stood up. I'll see you in court tomorrow, Mr. Miller. I'm going to ask the judge for a continuance to give me more time to prepare your case. In the meantime, is there anything you need? John shook his head. No, ma'am, just, if it's possible, could you check on my backpack? Make sure that medal is safe? It's all I have left from those days. I'll check on it personally, Amy promised. As she left the jail, Amy felt a new determination. Her other cases would have to wait a little longer. Something about John Miller's story had touched her. A decorated veteran should not be in jail for taking thrown-away food. She would make this right somehow. Back in her office, Amy started making calls. First to the court clerk, to prepare for requesting a continuance. Then to Veterans Affairs, to start the process of retrieving John's military records. The VA representative told her it could take weeks to get the full records. Amy didn't have weeks. As she was leaving for the night, Greg Peters stopped by her office. How's the new case? He asked. Complicated, Amy replied. He's a Ranger, Silver Star recipient, 3 tours in Afghanistan. Now he's homeless and in jail for taking bread from a dumpster. Greg raised his eyebrows. Silver Star? You sure about that? That's what he says. I'm trying to get his records, but the VA moves slowly. Greg leaned against her doorframe. Nelson, I know that look. Don't get too invested. You've got 17 other cases that need your attention too. Amy knew he was right, but she couldn't let this go. I know, but something's not right here. This man served his country, Greg. He shouldn't be sleeping on the streets or sitting in jail for being hungry. Greg sighed. Just remember, you can't save everyone. Do what you can, then move on to the next case. That's the job. But as Amy drove home that night, she knew this wasn't just another case to her. John Miller deserved better than what the system had given him, and somehow she was going to make sure he got it. Amy stood before Judge Wilson the next morning, feeling tired after a late night of research. The courtroom was busy as usual, filled with the sounds of shuffling papers and quiet conversations. Your Honor, I'm requesting a continuance in the case of John Miller, Amy said. I need more time to gather important information about my client's background that may affect these proceedings. Judge Wilson peered over his glasses at Amy. He was an older man with gray hair and a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. Ms. Nelson, this is a simple case of trespassing and petty theft. Why do you need more time? Amy stood her ground. Mr. Miller is a military veteran, Your Honor. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I believe his service record and subsequent struggles with PTSD are directly relevant to this case. The judge considered this for a moment. Very well. 2 weeks. but I expect this matter to be resolved at that time." He struck his gavel, and the bailiff called the next case. As Amy gathered her papers, she noticed Officer Samantha Carter sitting at the back of the courtroom. This was unusual. Officers rarely attended hearings for minor cases unless they were scheduled to testify. Amy approached her after leaving the courtroom. "Officer Carter, I'm Amy Nelson, John Miller's attorney. I'm surprised to see you here today." Samantha stood up. "I wanted to see what would happen with Mr. Miller's case. Something about him stayed with me after the arrest." Amy was intrigued. "Would you have time for a coffee? I'd like to hear more about your interaction with him." 20 minutes later, they sat in a small cafe across from the courthouse. Amy noticed that Officer Carter seemed uncomfortable in this setting, perhaps unused to socializing with defense attorneys. "I've been an officer for 7 years, Samantha began. "You develop a sense about people. Mr. Miller was different from most people I arrest. The way he spoke, how he carried himself." Amy nodded. "I noticed that too. Did he say anything about his military service when you arrested him?" "Just that he was a ranger. But after I brought him in, I found something interesting." Samantha reached into her pocket and pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was the laminated newspaper clipping that had fallen from John's pocket during the arrest. This was with his personal items. "I made a copy for the evidence log, but thought you should see the original." Amy took the bag and examined the faded clipping. The headline read, "Local soldier receives Silver Star for heroism." Below was a photo of a much younger John Miller in military dress uniform, standing at attention as someone pinned a medal to his chest. The article text was faded, but Amy could make out phrases like, "under heavy enemy fire," and "saved the lives of his fellow soldiers." "Have you been able to read the whole article?" Amy asked. Samantha shook her head. "It's too faded, but I did some searching last night. Found a military database with basic service records. John Miller did serve with the 75th Rangers, and he did receive a Silver Star in 2006. The details of the mission are classified, but the citation mentions extraordinary heroism in combat." Amy felt a surge of excitement. This confirmed what John had told her. "Officer Carter, why are you helping with this? Most police officers don't get involved after making an arrest." Samantha was quiet for a moment. "My brother served in Iraq. He came home different. He had good support, so he's okay now. But I've seen what happens to veterans who don't have that support. Mr. Miller shouldn't be in jail for taking food that was going to waste." Amy felt a new respect for the officer. "I'm trying to get his full military records, but the VA is slow. Any chance you could help speed things up through your police connections?" Samantha thought for a moment. "I know someone in the Veterans Liaison office at the department. Let me see what I can do." They exchanged phone numbers and Amy hurried back to her office. She had other cases that needed attention, but John's situation kept pulling at her thoughts. That evening, Amy drove to the VA hospital on the edge of town. The building was large and impersonal, with long hallways and fluorescent lights. She had called ahead and arranged to meet with Dr. Paul Rogers, a psychiatrist who specialized in PTSD treatment for veterans. Dr. Rogers met her in a small office cluttered with books and papers. He was a kind-looking man in his 50s with a beard and tired eyes. "Thank you for seeing me, doctor," Amy said. "I'm trying to help a client, John Miller. He mentioned receiving treatment here for PTSD after his service in Afghanistan." Dr. Rogers nodded. "I can't discuss specific patients, of course, but I can talk generally about how veterans with PTSD might end up homeless." "That would be helpful," Amy said. "Many veterans come home with invisible wounds," Dr. Rogers explained. "They look fine on the outside, but inside they're struggling. Nightmares, flashbacks, trouble sleeping. Some turn to alcohol or drugs to cope. Others isolate themselves, push away family and friends. And the system? How does it fail them?" Amy asked. Dr. Rogers sighed. "The VA tries, but it's understaffed and overwhelmed. Veterans have to navigate a complex system of forms and appointments. For someone struggling with PTSD, that can be impossible. They miss appointments, paperwork gets lost, benefits get delayed or denied. Then comes eviction, and before you know it, they're on the street. Amy thought about John, with his clear eyes and straight posture, sleeping in parks and taking food from dumpsters. "It's not right," she said softly. "No, it's not," Dr. Rogers agreed. "But it happens all too often." As Amy was leaving, Dr. Rogers stopped her. "Ms. Nelson, if your client is who I think he is, you should know something. Some of these veterans, especially the ones from special operations units, they've seen and done things most of us can't. Imagine, their stories can be difficult to hear. Be prepared for that." Amy nodded, wondering what John Miller had experienced in Afghanistan that had followed him home. The next day, Amy received a call from Officer Carter. "I've got something," Samantha said. "My contact at the Veterans Liaison Office pulled some strings. I have a copy of John's Silver Star citation and some basic service records. I can't give you everything, but I can let you see what I have." They met in the same cafe. Samantha slid a folder across the table. "This doesn't leave this table," she warned. "I'm already bending rules by showing you this." Amy opened the folder and began reading. John had enlisted at 18, served with distinction, and risen to the rank of sergeant. The Silver Star citation described a mission where his unit was ambushed. Under heavy enemy fire, John had carried 3 wounded soldiers to safety, returned to the fight, and then gone back for 2 more wounded men. "He saved 5 lives that day," Samantha said quietly. Amy continued reading. After his 3rd tour, John had been diagnosed with severe PTSD. He had received treatment at the VA for nearly a year before being released. Then there were gaps in his records, indications of missed appointments, and finally nothing. He had simply disappeared from the system. "There's more," Samantha said. "I found his old address and went there, talked to the landlord. He said John was a quiet tenant who always paid on time until about 3 years ago. Then something changed. The landlord said John started having episodes, pacing at night, sometimes shouting. Neighbors complained. Then his rent checks stopped coming. When the landlord went to check, John's apartment was empty except for a military duffel bag with some clothes and a few photographs." "Did the landlord keep any of his things?" Amy asked. "No. He said he threw everything out after 30 days, as allowed by law." Amy felt a wave of sadness. John's life had been reduced to a backpack and a faded newspaper clipping. "There's one more thing," Samantha added. "The mission where John earned his Silver Star? I did some digging, found a military forum where someone mentioned it. Apparently it was a big deal. The soldiers he saved included a captain who later became a major. His name is Eric Davis. He's still in the Army, stationed at Fort Lewis, about 3 hours from here." Amy's mind raced with possibilities. "Do you think he would remember John?" "You don't forget the person who saved your life," Samantha said simply. That night, Amy sat in her small apartment, surrounded by notes and printouts. Her other cases sat in a pile, temporarily neglected. She knew her supervisor would be upset, but she couldn't let this go. She picked up her phone and dialed the number Samantha had given her for Fort Lewis. After several transfers and long holds, she finally reached the office of Major Eric Davis. "This is Major Davis," a crisp voice answered. "Major Davis, my name is Amy Nelson. I'm a public defender in Portland. I'm calling about a former ranger named John Miller." There was a pause. "Sergeant Miller? From 2nd Battalion?" Amy felt her heart beat faster. "Yes, that's him." "What about him?" The major's voice had changed, become more guarded. "He's my client, sir. He's homeless, arrested for taking food from a dumpster. I'm trying to help him." Another long pause. "Sergeant Miller is homeless?" Disbelief filled the major's voice. "Yes, sir. For about 3 years now, after his treatment at the VA for PTSD. That's not right," Major Davis said, his voice now angry. "Not for a man like him, not after what he did." Amy took a deep breath. "Major Davis, would you be willing to tell me about that day, about what John did?" The major was quiet for so long that Amy thought he might have hung up. Then he spoke, his voice low and intense. "Ms. Nelson, I'll do better than that. I'm coming to Portland." Amy sat in her car outside the county jail, gathering her thoughts. The past week had been a whirlwind of phone calls, research, and late nights. Today, she would see John again to share what she had learned and prepare for the upcoming hearing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Officer Carter. Package arrived from VA, bringing it to your office this afternoon. Amy smiled. Samantha had become an unexpected ally, using her police connections to speed up the normally slow process of getting military records. Amy typed back a quick thank you and got out of her car. Inside the jail, the familiar process unfolded, signing in, emptying her pockets, following a guard to the meeting room. She had visited so many clients here that the guards knew her by name. When John was brought in, Amy noticed he looked different. His beard had been trimmed, and he wore a clean jail uniform instead of his dirty street clothes. But it was his eyes that showed the biggest change. A small spark of hope had replaced the resignation she had seen before. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Amy said as she set her files on the table. "Morning, ma'am," John replied, sitting down across from her. "You look well," Amy commented. John ran a hand over his trimmed beard. "The jail chaplain helped me clean up a bit, said it might make a difference in court." He paused. "Have you found anything that might help my case?" Amy opened her folder. "Actually, I've found quite a lot. I've spoken with Officer Carter, the officer who arrested you. She's been helping me gather information about your military service." John looked surprised. "The officer is helping you? Why would she do that?" "Because she believes, like I do, that you shouldn't be in jail for taking food that was being thrown away. Especially not after serving your country the way you did." John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What exactly did you find out about my service?" Amy laid out some papers on the table. "I know you were with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion. I know you served 3 tours in Afghanistan. And I know you received the Silver Star for saving the lives of 5 fellow soldiers during an ambush." John's eyes dropped to the table. His hands, resting on the metal surface, tightened into fists, then relaxed. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "I spoke with someone who remembers it very well," Amy said. "Major Eric Davis." John's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "You talked to Eric? How did you find him?" "Officer Carter helped. Major Davis is stationed at Fort Lewis now, and he's coming to Portland for your court hearing." John stood up suddenly, turning away from Amy. He walked to the corner of the small room, his back to her, shoulders tense. "He shouldn't do that, it's not necessary." Amy was confused by his reaction. "He wants to help you, John. He says he owes you his life." John remained facing the corner. When he spoke, his voice was tight with emotion. "I did what any of them would have done. It doesn't make me special." Amy approached him carefully, stopping a few feet away. "John, what happened to you after you came home? How did a decorated ranger end up homeless?" John was quiet for a long time. When he finally turned around, his face was composed again, but his eyes held a deep sadness. "I came back different. Couldn't sleep. When I did, I had nightmares. Kept seeing their faces, not just the men I saved, but the ones I couldn't save. The enemy, too. I tried to deal with it myself. That's what Rangers do, right? Handle their own problems." He sat back down heavily. "It got worse. The VA diagnosed me with PTSD, gave me pills that made me feel like a zombie. Tried therapy, but talking about it just brought everything back. I started missing appointments. Then there was some mix-up with my benefits. The checks stopped coming. Couldn't pay rent, lost my apartment." John gestured vaguely. "After that, it was just easier to disappear. No one asking questions, no one expecting anything from me. Just surviving day to day." Amy sat down across from him again. "But you kept your Silver Star and that newspaper clipping." A faint smile crossed John's face. "Some things you can't let go of. They remind you of who you were before." Amy reached across the table, almost touching his hand before remembering the jail's strict no-contact rules. "You're still that person, John, the same man who risked his life to save others, and now people want to help you." John looked skeptical. "Why?" "I'm just another homeless vet. There are hundreds like me in this city alone. Because your story matters. It shows how we're failing the people who serve this country. And because you deserve better than this. A guard knocked on the door, signaling their time was almost up. I need to go prepare for your hearing, Amy said. But I'll be back tomorrow with some clothes for you to wear to court. Something better than the jail uniform. John nodded. Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for everything you're doing. As Amy left the jail, she felt more determined than ever to help John, but she also worried about his reaction to learning Major Davis would be at the hearing. Instead of seeming happy or relieved, John had seemed almost afraid. That afternoon, Officer Carter arrived at Amy's office with a large envelope. This just came from the VA. Had to call in a lot of favors to get it this fast. They spread the contents across Amy's desk. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, benefit applications. Page after page documenting John's struggles after leaving the Army. Look at this, Samantha said, pointing to a psychiatric report. Severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, depression. The doctor recommended intensive inpatient treatment, but it was never approved. Budget cuts. Amy read through the benefit applications. His payments were stopped because he missed 3 appointments in a row. The notice was sent to his apartment, but by then he had already been evicted. They continued reading, piecing together John's downward spiral from decorated soldier to homeless veteran. The system had failed him at every turn. Overworked VA staff, lost paperwork, delayed benefits, inadequate treatment. This is heartbreaking, Samantha said, holding a photograph they had found among the records. It showed a younger John in his ranger uniform standing proudly with his unit. How does this happen? Amy shook her head. Too easily. But we're going to make it right. As they were organizing the papers, Amy's phone rang. It was Major Eric Davis. I've arrived in Portland, he said. And I'm not alone. 3 other men from our unit are with me. We all owe John our lives. Amy felt a surge of hope. That's wonderful, Major. The hearing is tomorrow at 9. We'll be there, he promised. And Ms. Nelson, thank you for finding him. We've been looking for John for years. After he disappeared from the VA, no one knew what happened to him. After hanging up, Amy shared the news with Samantha. 4 Rangers are coming to the hearing tomorrow. This could change everything. Samantha smiled. I'll be there too, in uniform. That evening, Amy visited a local thrift store and bought clothes for John to wear to court, a simple button-up shirt, clean slacks, and polished shoes. Nothing fancy, but dignified. She worked late into the night preparing her arguments for the judge. The charges against John were minor, but the missed court date complicated matters. Still, with the evidence of his service, his medical condition, and the support of his former comrades, she felt confident. As she drove home after midnight, Amy found herself thinking about what John had said, that there were hundreds of veterans like him on the streets. Helping one man wouldn't fix the broken system, but it was a start. The next morning, Amy arrived at the jail early with the clothes for John. As he changed in a private room, she briefed him on what to expect. The courtroom might be more crowded than usual, she warned, not mentioning exactly who would be there. She was still puzzled by his reaction to hearing about Major Davis. John emerged wearing the clean clothes. The transformation was remarkable. With his beard trimmed, his hair combed, and wearing proper clothes instead of ragged streetwear or a jail uniform, he looked like a different person. His military bearing was even more evident now. Ready? Amy asked. John took a deep breath and nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. As they walked toward the courtroom, Amy noticed John's steps slowing. His face had grown pale and he was breathing more rapidly. John? Are you okay? He stopped, leaning against the wall. Just give me a minute. Crowds are hard for me. Haven't been around many people in a long time. Amy realized what was happening. The PTSD. The crowded courtroom would be stressful for him, especially not knowing what to expect. John, I need to tell you something. Major Davis isn't coming alone. There are 3 others from your unit with him. John closed his eyes, his breathing still rapid. Who? He didn't say. Just that they all owe you their lives. John stood straighter, visibly gathering his strength. Okay, let's do this. As they approached the courtroom doors, Amy saw John's hands trembling slightly, but his face was composed, his eyes determined. Whatever happened next, he would face it with the same courage that had earned him the Silver Star years ago. The county courthouse was busier than usual that Thursday morning. Amy guided John through the main hallway, noticing how he tensed at the crowds. His eyes constantly scanned the area, a habit from his military days that had never left him. Courtroom 3, Amy said, pointing to a door ahead. Judge Richard Simmons will hear your case. He's tough but fair. John nodded, saying nothing. His face was calm, but Amy could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. As they approached the courtroom, Amy spotted Officer Carter in her formal police uniform, standing near the door. Beside her were 4 men in military dress uniforms, their chests decorated with ribbons and medals. John stopped abruptly. "That's them," he whispered, his voice tight. Before Amy could respond, one of the men turned and saw John. He was tall, with short, gray hair and the bearing of a career military officer. Major Eric Davis. The major's face registered shock, then profound emotion. He stepped forward quickly, stopping a few feet from John. "Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice thick. John straightened, almost coming to attention. "Major Davis, sir." For a moment, the 2 men simply looked at each other. Then Major Davis did something unexpected. He saluted John, a formal military salute delivered with perfect precision. The other 3 men in uniform immediately followed suit, each saluting John with deep respect. John hesitated, then returned the salute crisply. The simple military gesture seemed to steady him. "We've been looking for you for years, John," Major Davis said, dropping the salute. "After you disappeared from the VA, no one knew what happened to you." John looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Just fell on some hard times, sir. Nothing special about that." One of the other men stepped forward. He was younger than the major, with a scar running along his jawline. "Nothing special? You saved our lives, Sergeant. You carried me a half-mile with a bullet in your own leg." Amy watched as John struggled with the emotions these reunions stirred. Before he could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff announced that court was about to begin. Inside, Amy was surprised to see the courtroom was nearly full. Word had spread that something unusual was happening in the case of the homeless veteran. She recognized several reporters, some of her colleagues from the public defender's office, and even her supervisor, Greg Peters. Amy and John took their seats at the defense table. The prosecutor, a young man named Daniel White, nodded to Amy from across the aisle. They had spoken briefly that morning, and Amy sensed he was open to resolving this case favorably. Major Davis and the other soldiers sat directly behind John. Officer Carter sat nearby. The bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Simmons entered the courtroom. Judge Simmons was in his 60s with silver hair and a stern expression. He had been a judge for over 20 years and had a reputation for running a tight courtroom. "Case number 2457, State versus John Miller," the bailiff announced. "Charges are trespassing and petty theft, with an additional charge for failure to appear for a previous court date." Judge Simmons looked over his glasses at John. "Mr. Miller, how do you plead?" Amy stood. "Your Honor, before my client enters a plea, I would like to present some mitigating factors for the court's consideration." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Nelson." Amy took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for. "Your Honor, my client is John Miller, a decorated veteran who served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Sergeant Miller was awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat, one of our nation's highest military honors." She placed a document on the projector. John's military service record appeared on the screen at the front of the courtroom. Amy outlined John's service history, his honorable discharge, and the citation for his Silver Star. After his service, Sergeant Miller suffered from severe PTSD. Despite seeking treatment at the VA, he fell through the cracks of the system. Administrative errors led to the loss of his benefits. Without support, he lost his housing and has been living on the streets for the past 3 years. Judge Simmons was listening intently, his expression softening slightly. The charges before this court stem directly from Sergeant Miller's circumstances. He took discarded food from a dumpster because he was hungry. He missed a court date because, without a home or resources, he had no way to keep track of dates or appointments. Amy gestured to the men in uniform behind John. Present in court today are 4 soldiers whose lives Sergeant Miller saved in Afghanistan, including Major Eric Davis. The judge looked at the uniformed men with interest. Major Davis, would you stand and identify yourself? Major Davis stood. Yes, Your Honor. I'm Major Eric Davis, currently stationed at Fort Lewis. In 2006, I was a captain serving with Sergeant Miller in Afghanistan. During an ambush, I was severely wounded. Sergeant Miller carried me to safety under heavy enemy fire, then returned for 4 more wounded men. He saved all our lives that day, at great risk to his own. Judge Simmons nodded. Thank you, Major. Please be seated. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, in light of the information presented, the state wishes to dismiss all charges against Mr. Miller. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Amy felt a surge of relief and gratitude. But Judge Simmons held up his hand. Before I rule on that request, I have a question for the defendant. He looked directly at John. Mr. Miller, is what Ms. Nelson and Major Davis have told this court accurate? Are you the same John Miller who received the Silver Star for the actions described? John stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Wait, don't imprison him, called a voice from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was one of the men in uniform, a stocky man with a weathered face. He stood up, visibly emotional. Judge, you can't put this man in jail for being hungry. Not after what he did for us for this country. Before the judge could respond, Major Davis stood again. Your Honor, with all due respect to the court, I feel compelled to speak. His voice took on a formal tone. Attention. Sergeant John Miller, Silver Star recipient, is present. What happened next would be talked about in the Portland courthouse for years to come. At Major Davis's words, every military veteran in the room, including Judge Simmons himself, rose to their feet in respect. The judge, a Vietnam veteran, stepped down from the bench and approached John. The courtroom was completely silent. Sergeant Miller, Judge Simmons said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. This court is not in the business of imprisoning heroes who have been failed by the very country they served. He turned to the prosecutor. The charges are dismissed. Relief washed over John's face, but he remained standing straight, acknowledging the judge with a nod. Judge Simmons wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is ordering the immediate creation of a Veterans Assistance Program within our jurisdiction. No veteran should end up homeless and hungry after serving this country. He looked around the courtroom. This case is adjourned. As people began to move and talk, Amy turned to John. It's over. You're free to go. John looked slightly lost, as if he wasn't sure what freedom meant anymore. Where do I go? Major Davis approached. John, we've made arrangements. A local veterans organization has housing for you, and I've personally started the paperwork to restore your benefits. It won't happen overnight, but we're going to make this right. For the first time since Amy had met him, John's composure broke slightly. His eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Officer Carter said, joining them. Just accept the help, that's all. As they left the courtroom, reporters tried to approach, but Major Davis and the other soldiers formed a protective circle around John, guiding him through the crowd. Outside on the courthouse steps, John stopped and looked up at the sky, breathing deeply as if tasting freedom for the first time in years. What happens now? Amy asked, standing beside him. Now the real work begins, Major Davis said. Getting John the help he needs, the benefits he earned, making sure this doesn't happen to other veterans. Amy looked at John. Are you ready for that? John's eyes, once resigned and tired, now held a spark of something new. Hope. One day at a time, ma'am. That's how we did it over there. That's how I'll do it here. In the months that followed, John's story spread beyond Portland. It became a rallying point for veterans advocacy groups and prompted reviews of VA procedures. In several states, Amy Nelson went on to establish a legal aid clinic specifically for veterans inspired by her experience with John. Officer Carter became the police department's first veterans liaison officer, and John Miller, no longer homeless, began volunteering at the VA hospital 3 days a week, helping other veterans navigate the system that had once failed him. His quiet strength and dignity, which had never left him even in his darkest times, now served as an inspiration to others who were struggling. His story, which might have ended in a jail cell for the crime of being hungry, instead became a powerful reminder of both the cost of service and the importance of remembering those who paid it.